So, Martin, thank you very much for agreeing to join me this afternoon to explore how the Iona community engages with the Bible. The first question, which I'm asking everybody, is this. Part of the commitment as a member of the Iona community is to regular engagement with the Bible and other materials which nourish us. Can you say a bit about what this part of our rule means to you, how you live it out, and maybe explore, is there a particular methodology or approach or passion that guides you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've had a relationship, I guess, with the Bible since I was a child. I grew up in a home where we were taught to read the Bible every day and so on. And while I would now find that a very restrictive way of approaching the Bible, it's nevertheless part of a life rhythm, I guess. I would say that I've always wanted to engage with the Bible in one way or another. I think that's because now the Bible has its own attraction to me, because it's a book full of all sorts of very human stories, and it's a very honest book in all sorts of ways. It's at times it's a violent and disturbing book, other times it's a comforting book, and it has some wonderful stories which are worth retelling and rereading, because they give you new meaning every time you read them.
Sure.
And I really do mean that. I mean, sometimes people talk about stuff having more meaning every time you read it, and actually that's a way of saying I really don't understand it. But actually, I think when you stop and read and think, the Bible has a huge amount to say to us about living our lives today. How I approach it has changed greatly over the years. I guess when I was studying to train for ministry, the most prominent way of reading the Bible was trying to find a historical perspective on it, and to search for the kind of original meaning of the text, what the author intended to convey, and so on. I've changed my mind hugely on that over the years, and I think that there's much more to be gained from letting the Bible simply speak to you. I learned a lot of that from engaging with folks, particularly in Central America and El Salvador, where people very often were not literate, and therefore the only way they could approach the Bible was to listen to it and to respond to it from their own experience of life. And I found that to be very powerful, and it taught me a lot about reading the Bible with an open ear rather than trying to find a fixed meaning.
I love that notion of with an open ear. It reminds me of Janet Lee's book about the remembered Bible, and the amount of remembered knowledge we have that we store within ourselves, sometimes from childhood or from experiences through life, that we have a memory that is not dependent on being literate. So yeah, I really resonate with that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the other thing that I would certainly do now, and this is something I've learned particularly from feminist approaches to the Bible, is to read with what professionals call a hermeneutic of suspicion. In other words, to not just to trust the text for what it appears to say, but to listen behind that to what some of the undertones of the text are, the things that are not being said openly, and the things that are being hidden, and the power structures which inform it. Because of course most of the Bible, in fact all of the Bible really, comes out of a very male perspective, patriarchal perspective, and we have to be able to read behind that if it's going to be of any use to us.
Sure. I mean, that also reminds me of, I think it's Marcus Borg who talks about taking the Bible seriously, but not necessarily literally. And I think, that's a really important distinction. We can take it very seriously, but that doesn't mean, it means having to read behind the text.
Who are the characters in a story who are named, for example, is really important. Who are the characters who are kept on the margins, but who may have a great deal to say. And often when I'm preparing, for example, for preaching, I'll be looking for those characters so that people who have probably heard the story that's going to be told 100 times before actually hear it differently,
Yeah.
rather than hearing the same thing over again and reinforcing what they already think and believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. That's great. Opening up to particularly listening with new ears and new perspectives, and that global learning from across the globe that you've alluded to. My second question is a more specific one. I guess it's to do with your own particular experience. So you've worked for many years, both in theological colleges teaching scripture, and then more recently within the institutions of the church. In what ways have you engaged with or seen others engage creatively with scripture in these contexts that's given you hope, given you life?
I guess I've seen people engage with, it's a bit of a follow on from what I said already. I mean, I think I've seen people engage perhaps more honestly with scripture than they have in the past. And I've seen folk begin to search for some of the things that have been covered up. I remember one particular story, if I can just tell you this, which might illustrate it. Preaching in a church in Manchester where I went regularly, which was probably 75% West Indian congregation in terms of background. And it happened that weekend that the text in the lectionary was the wisdom story from Proverbs 8, which I was hugely interested in because it's what I'd spent a lot of my time researching for my PhD. You know, I gave a bit of background on wisdom as a female image of God, and we had a way of working in that congregation where once you'd preached, there was an opportunity for people just to pitch in and to discuss. It's always interesting, you know, sometimes quite wacky. It was great, you know. At the end of doing my kind of input bit, sermon bit, there were 2 or 3 of the women in the congregation who were really quite angry and said, well, why have we never heard this before? You know, and these were folk in their 70s probably at that time. So why have we never heard this story before? And I said, well, I'm not sure because it's there, you know, and it is actually part of the lectionary, and we tended to use the lectionary in that congregation. But they had lived all their lives without hearing that such a story existed, which was able to picture God's work in creation as being in partnership with this woman, Wisdom, or Sophia to give her a Greek name because it gives her gender as well at that point. Wisdom's it's a neutral word in English, but Sophia takes you right immediately to this female figure. And I think that it was really important for me at that point to learn from these folks that actually we have covered up a lot in the church, and often quite deliberately for internal political reasons, and usually reasons of male power at that point. That we don't release these stories to have their life amongst the people. You know, I've always tried, particularly since then, to ensure that when I'm preaching, I'm picking up on stories which will connect with people in a way which says something to their current life and isn't just an abstract eulogy about faith, which may be of no particular benefit to people at all.
And that fits very much with what I've read about the Iona Community's approach, that this is an incarnational approach to scripture, that it doesn't make sense unless it makes sense in a bodily sense to the human beings to whom Jesus was the good news. And this is the litmus test, if you like, that it needs to be good news to the people of God. Good news can sometimes be disturbing news, doesn't always need to be happy news. But good news about the poor, good news about economic justice, about social justice, about spiritual justice. And I guess what you're saying is, as a preacher and a teacher and an administrator within the church in this broadest sense, you've used that as one of your benchmarks, that the Gospels have to be, or the scripture in general has to be about how it connects with individual people where they are at.
Yeah. Always question the text. But when I was working with students particularly, I wanted to emphasize that with them. Never be afraid to question the text. And to say, why does it say that? Why doesn't it say something else? That's often a good question to ask.
And I think that's a great place to pause for this bit of the conversation, that, that openness, that the text is there for us to engage with it and to question it. And you're saying always to bring that hermeneutic of suspicion and of questioning, curiosity, I guess, at its best, to text.
God's not frightened by our questions.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.